I'm going to mute everybody. And like always, if you have something that you want to say or you have a question, want to interact, then just unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself by hitting the microphone button. You know that you have something that you'd like to say. And we're picking up at Genesis 32, Genesis chapter 32. And we just left where Jacob had his interaction with Laban. Jacob had left Padan Aram, which again is just a little east of where modern Turkey is, straight up north from Israel. And he had just left there, was heading back home, and Laban chased him down, and they had this whole confrontation. Want to keep in the back of our minds that Rachel, remember, stole Laban's household gods, and she still has them. So we want to keep that in mind. And Jacob's getting ready to possibly meet his brother Esau, and the last time he saw him was 20 years ago, and he ran from him because his brother was in a rage wanting to kill him. So chapter 32, verse 1, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him, and when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. Now, I want to point out that, because I started noticing this in the Bible, that most of the time when someone encounters an angel, the angels come to them. They're not seeking out an angel. The angel shows up at them. I don't recall a time in the Bible when somebody was seeking out an encounter with an angel. Not that you can't do that. It's just I don't remember seeing that in the Bible. Usually the angels show up. And so verse 3, and Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And again, Edom is Esau's name in a different form. Edom means red, as well as Esau. From Esau will eventually come the Edomites that would become enemies to Israel. So he's sending message to him. And verse 4, instructing them, or messengers, instructing them, because they didn't have email back then, remember, or text messages. They couldn't Marco Polo or put a post on the Facebook page and tag Esau and say, "Hey, I'm coming back in town." They had to send people ahead to carry a messenger. I think there was another word besides messenger when we used to have that, when we would send a person with a message. Anybody remember? Was that a telegram? Not a telegram, was it? There was some other word for that we'd send message. But anyway, he's sending messengers to Esau. And verse 4, instructing them, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I may find favor in your sight." Now, Jacob, remember, is smooth. Remember, he's a smooth operator. So he knows that Esau, the last time he saw him, was mad. So I'm going to take the submissive posture. He calls Esau his lord. So he's going to try to take this submissive posture. He's going to try to make sure that Esau knows that he has a lot to offer, to try to see if he can not be in trouble with his brother still. Verse 6, and the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him." Now, what would you be thinking if the guy who wanted to kill you last is showing up with 400 other men with him? Yeah, I'm dead. I'm dead. He's coming to kill me. So Jacob is now going to have a panic reaction to what's coming his way. And verse 7, then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. He divided the people who were with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. Now, I want you to remember that line. So he's going to take his group that's with him, and it's not just his 4 wives and children, 11 children at this point. were 11 sons and then a daughter, at least one daughter mentioned. It's not just his wives and children, it's all these servants as well. It's all these animals. So this is a large entourage. And he's going to separate them. And he says that there's going to be one camp that goes first. And that camp is the guinea pig camp. Do you understand this? This is the camp that he says, okay, if this camp gets attacked, then we'll take off and run. So the question is, who do I put in that group? Who goes on the front lines that is the one that if anybody gets killed, these are the people that get killed? Verse 9, and Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, that I may do you good. Now, I want you to notice, when I came to know Christ, the way I learned how to pray is from the way people prayed in the Bible. And Jacob here, his first thing is, he reminds God what God said, because here's this possible threat that's coming his way. And he reminds God, listen, you told me to come here. You told me it was going to be good. So I'm counting on you to be faithful to do what you said, because right now there's an army of guys coming here likely to attack me, and you were supposed to make sure this works out well. So he's reminding him that's something that we need to do with the Lord. So like if you're wrestling with maybe a sin issue, remind the Lord, God, you said you would be gracious to me if I confess. If you're wrestling with, you need strength, Lord, you said you would give me strength. If you're wrestling with depression, Lord, you said that the joy of the Lord would be my strength. And just remind him of things as if he needs reminded. God knows all things. But this is what happens often in prayers. If you read the Psalms, often the prayers and Psalms are reminding God of what he said he would be doing or would be like. Then verse 10, I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant, for with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. He also makes sure to acknowledge that he doesn't deserve to have anything he's asking for. And when we're praying, we have to make sure that it doesn't become an arrogant thing when we're reminding God that he said he would be such and such. We're appealing to his character. We're not appealing to what we deserve. I don't deserve this, Lord. It's just that's who you are. And because of who you are, I expect that you would do this. I don't deserve this at all. And in fact, he's recognizing all the things that God has given him. And these are also important because I think sometimes when we pray, we're almost helping ourselves out. I think that we're hearing and realizing what we're saying, and we're realizing, okay, so if I don't get this thing I'm asking for, I just thanked God because he has given me all these other things. And so we're kind of sowing seeds into our heart to be content and joyful no matter what the outcome is. So there's all kinds of dynamics in prayer, which is why I always encourage people to be completely honest with God when you pray. If you're mad at him, tell him you're mad. If you don't trust him, tell him you don't trust him. If you have a flesh issue, tell him you have a flesh issue and you desire whatever it is that you're desiring. Just be honest, and with that kind of transparency, that's where God comes in and does great work in your prayer life. Verse 11, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, again, he's reminding him of what God said he would do, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So bartering with God. God, this was the deal. You said you would do this. I'm asking you just to hold up your end of the bargain that you said you would do good to me. So these are ways that we pray to the Lord. And note something interesting to me. Actually, there's a couple of things to consider. And spoiler alert here. If you don't know the story, Esau does not attack Jacob. In fact, Esau shows up very friendly and wanting to seek a healthy relationship with his brother. And we actually don't know what happened on Esau's side. And there's a couple of possibilities that come to my mind. One is that Esau was coming to attack. I mean, I don't really comprehend why he brought 400 guys with him, but there could have been other reasons besides bringing like a military attack kind of scenario. Could be. Cindy's saying it could have been a defensive move that maybe Jacob was planning on attacking. But if Esau's intentions were not good, then that would mean that Jacob's prayer here changed Esau's intentions. Or it could be the other option, which I am kind of inclined to think it was my second option here, is that Esau had no intention of attacking Jacob, but here's Jacob asking God to fix a problem that doesn't exist. Have you ever been in those scenarios where you're actually asking God to fix something that's not there? There's not actually a problem. And then it's funny how sometimes when the problem goes away, we think, oh, God did an amazing thing. And really it was just our fear. Maybe it was the fear that needed to be removed, and that was the amazing thing. But think about that when you're praying. I try my best to be a listener when I'm praying. What's going on spiritually around me? What is it that God is doing? What's he revealing is happening? What's happening in other people? Because there's a lot that takes place when you pray. And I wish people understood how much can transpire if you pray. A heart can be changed, miracles can happen, provisions can show up, you can be transformed, all kinds of things can happen with prayer. Only wish that more of us did more of it. Verse 13, so he stayed there that night. Remember, back then, it took days to travel different locations. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats. I want you to notice a trend here. There's always more female animals than there are male animals, and he's preparing these for a gift. 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. Now, the reason why there's more females than males, I think, is probably obvious. It's so that he can breed the animals, and he's wanting to give a healthy stock to Esau that could be multiplied. Then verse 16, these he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between drove and drove. He instructed the first, when Esau my brother meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, they belong to your servant Jacob. Again, he's taken that submissive posture. And this is not that we need to do this. It's just this was Jacob's posturing with his brother. They are a present to my lord Esau, and moreover, he is behind us. Which is interesting that Jacob initially was not going to be at the front. But we're going to see that, I don't know if he changes his mind, but he ultimately ends up being the first one heading out to meet Esau. Now, I'm not sure if this was the band of gifts that goes first, and then he arranges the family in sections behind them, and Jacob goes behind the gift, but before his family. But he ultimately ends up in a front posture. Verse 19, he likewise instructed the second and the third, and all who followed the droves, you shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me, and afterward I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. So the present group is going first before the family. Yes. Does the present group get attacked or not? And they'll take off. Now, here comes an experience that Jacob has that still is bizarre to me, and I'll explain why this story is difficult for me to work out theologically. Verse 22, the same night he arose and took his two wives, his two female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the daybreak of the day, or till the breaking of the day, excuse me. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then the man says, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose up upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. So the thing that's perplexing to me, and I could try to work out that this guy that he wrestles with is not God, but we know the story, the storyline, and even outside of this passage says that Jacob wrestled with God, and it's referring to this event. We even see that after Jacob finishes wrestling with him, he says, "I have seen God face to face." So this figure was in some form a representation of God. In fact, when God changed Jacob's name to Israel, it was because you have wrestled with or striven with man and with God and have prevailed. So the things that are perplexing to me is, one, if this figure was God, why was he concerned about the sun coming up? Because you see that in the story. The man was like, "Let me go because the sun is coming up." I don't understand why God needed to flee from the rising sun. And secondly, how did any human being prevail against God? You know, if I'm wrestling with God, I just always imagine I would lose. I mean, this is always DJ's question. Is Jesus stronger than Iron Man? Is Jesus stronger than Captain America? Is Jesus stronger than Bigfoot? Is Jesus stronger than whatever character you can name in there? And the answer is always yes, Jesus is stronger. But somehow Jacob prevails. He pins God down to the ground and refuses to let him go unless this God figure blesses him. I wish I could say I have an explanation to this. I have no idea what is happening here. I could guess that maybe God allowed Jacob to prevail, and there was some reason, some lesson in this whole story as to why he prevailed. Although I don't know if he truly prevailed, in that he came out like he lost because he's limping because of that issue with his hip. So this is an intriguing story that I'm still kind of. Do you have stories like that in the Bible where you're still kind of at a loss? You know, I don't know what to do. I don't know what happened. Other than that Jacob, it really speaks to his persistence. Jacob would not quit on something. If he wanted to have something, he was going to have it. I mean, he worked 14 years basically in order to assure that he had Rachel as his wife. So again, this is an intriguing thing. And if you ever figure out the answer, please let me know, because I'm dying to know how Jacob beat God. I don't need to know. Yeah, Cindy's reminding myself of points that I've often made that we don't need to know. Yeah, and that drives me nuts, though. Notice in verse 32, he used that phrase, and I don't know if you've been noticing that this phrase is a lot in Scripture. That is it in 32? The "to this day" line. Yeah, therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew. Remember that to this day means 1500 or so BC. It's when Moses is writing this stuff down and they have left Egypt and then now somewhere in that wilderness wandering experience. So to this day, so that to the time of Moses, people were still not eating the sinew as a gesture towards Jacob. Now verse 33, and Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So here comes the army that's approaching. So he divided the children among, now listen to this. He divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front. Now, I don't know if they were all a part of the same group, Bilhah and, is it Zilpah? I want to say Zilpah. And the children that were from them. And so there were 4 children that were from those 2 wives. Or if they were 2 separate groups, but it doesn't tell us what order. But either way, the people that go first are Zilpah and Bilhah and the 2 kids that belong to them. They go in the front. And we'll explore why that's a problem in a moment here, if you haven't caught that already. Then, where were we at here? Here we go. And Rachel, last part of verse 2, and Rachel and Joseph, then Leah with her children were second, and Rachel and Joseph were last of all. He himself went on before them. So see, this is where he goes ahead. So he's not acting like a coward at this point. And maybe it's that experience of wrestling. Maybe that's why God let him prevail, so that he would have the boldness to go in front of his family. I don't know. It's just a guess there. But because before, if you remember, he was in a state of panic and he was trying to contrive a way to escape. Yeah, he wanted to be last, but now he's rushing to the front after having this encounter with God. Isn't that really what happens most of the time? When you find yourself afraid, struggling, feeling weak, confused, depressed, you wrestle with God, you have an encounter. Remember that it was his prayer of insisting on God holding up his end of the bargain and pleading for God's mercy and recognizing Jacob's weakness that led to this wrestling with God moment. So the more you press in, yeah, right. So he prays that prayer and he pushes in. The result is he has this encounter with God that emboldens him to go to the front, to be the chivalrous man here and be the one who's willing to die first. But even though he's chivalrous, there's still a problem. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. So it wasn't just that it was Zilpah and Bilhah that were in the front. First of all, these are also his wives. Remember, it wasn't like Abraham, who took Hagar on as a concubine. I don't know if there was really ever an official marriage between the 2, but Jacob actually married Bilhah and Zilpah. And so he's willing to put his 2 wives, up there just behind him, so that if he gets killed and Esau's army moves past him, then it's going to be Zilpah and Bilhah, his 2 wives, and 4 of his children that would be the first to die. Then his second favorite is Leah and her 6 children, but his favorite is Rachel and Joseph. So think about the dynamic that's happening here. If you are Judah or Reuben or Gad or Dan or Asher, you're realizing that he's doing this to protect somebody, and the person he's looking to protect the most is that guy back there, Joseph and his mom Rachel. Think about the dynamic of what this says, of how Jacob feels towards some of his kids, towards 3 of his wives, and the way that they have to interact with that. And if you remember, we did a study on Joseph's life maybe a year ago or so, that these would be the roots of a tension that there would be between Joseph and his brothers that would ultimately erupt into them selling him off into slavery in their anger with him, and a lot of strife with their dad that they had because Jacob was showing favoritism here. And I love the book of Genesis, again, because of how much psychology is in this as far as human behavior and emotions. Most conflicts that we encounter were started well before the conflict erupts. Most relationship conflicts started when someone started pulling back, when someone started to remove communication, when someone changed in their demeanor towards the other person, when someone wasn't guarding their heart and a certain kind of emotion and perspective got in there towards the other person, when gossip started to happen and there was never a clearing the air about the information that was shared. At some point, things just boil over and erupt. And those of you that are on this call, or Chris and Cindy that are here, those of you that tend to just do what you do and kind of just ignore the possible problems and just let them go and just hope that they never erupt. How many of you know that most problems don't just go away? They just get bigger and bigger until eventually they're in your face and you have to do something about it. And it's 10 times as worse than if you would have done something with it in the beginning. So if Jacob would have wrestled through his feelings towards his wives and his children and would have made sure that he cared for all of his children equally, we might not have ever seen Joseph sold off into slavery. Now we know that God's hand was in it, that ultimately Joseph going into slavery resulted in the deliverance of Israel out of Egypt, as well as demonstrating that Moses was the voice, God's voice piece, and starting to give us scripture. There was a lot that God was doing with it, but nonetheless, we were making mistakes, which is, again, a great thing to realize, that God can take your mess ups and make great things happen from them. It's just, I would rather that I contributed to God's working by making the right choices rather than because I messed things up and he managed to take the mess ups and make something amazing happen with it. But that's still God's grace, that he can take the mess ups. There is constant states of do-overs often with God. There might still be ramifications to the choices, but there's constant state of do-overs. So in your life, think about, in your relationships, what are things that are lingering out there that aren't being worked on, but need to be worked on, because a problem is going to surface with that at some point if I don't deal with it. Verse 4, so Jacob is bowing before his brother, and apparently before his brother gets to him, fully gets in front of him, because verse 4 says, but Esau ran to meet him. And again, this is what seems to happen in this family, remember? The servant goes to get a wife for Isaac, and Rebekah runs to meet him, runs to tell her family. And then when Jacob shows up, fleeing from Esau, Rachel runs to tell the family. And then when Esau realizes that he sees Jacob, he runs to him. Again, I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's just Moses trying to make sure we get the mood of the moment. But there's this enthusiasm and passion as Esau is running to meet him, and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Now, I don't know if I could even imagine what Jacob felt at that moment, because he thought this was going to be bad. He thought he was going to possibly die here. And I don't know if Jacob ever had a good relationship with Esau. If you remember, they were wrestling coming out of the womb. And then they were fighting over the birthright and arguing about that. And then the whole deception about the blessing. And then Jacob flees, and they've been disconnected for 20 years. So I don't think they ever had a good relationship. And now here they are hugging and embracing each other. And I want to say that I want to believe that that Esau wasn't in that place and Jacob prayed and he was. But again, I don't know if that's what happened, but Esau had an obvious heart change at some point, because remember, he wanted to kill him. And so when you have a relation, yeah. Do you not know anybody that's held vendettas that long?
Yeah, but I don't understand that.
Oh, okay.
Talk like that,
Uh-huh.
and I don't understand that because our family, it doesn't matter what they do.
Okay.
They put up with me, I was like that. I mean, they still love me.
Cindy was saying that she doesn't understand a person that holds a grudge that long. But does anybody know somebody that's held a grudge for that length of time? I see some heads nodding. Is anybody on this call a person that's held a grudge for that long? um, what a great thing for this to be reconciled. And you know what's funny? Esau didn't have to do the gifts, and or Jacob. We're gonna see that Esau actually tries to turn down the gifts. Jacob didn't have to offer the gifts. Jacob didn't have to do all the bowing down and this whole strategy, the submissive talk and all that stuff. Esau wanted things to be right. And if this can happen with Jacob and Esau, this can happen between you and whoever it is that you have this rough relationship with. So again, don't ever think that there's something that you could pray for that can't happen. Just constantly pray for everything that you want to happen, and you can see great reconciliation. I've seen great reconciliation happen. Heather, are you raising your hand?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's funny because there's all these like amazing stories of God like parting the Red Sea and all these things. And this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. It's one of my favorites because it's just that like reconciliation. It gives you like almost just a glimpse of how heaven's going to be without all those, those things that stand in the way of relationships. And I don't know, that's all I have to add. I love this story.
Yeah, that is how heaven's going to be. When we get there, it's going to be this glorious reunion, and all of us are going to feel great towards each other. So what an awesome thing that happens here. And something interesting is going to happen that unfolds here that still kind of sticks with Jacob's character. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise, and so the servants came first because they were the least loved. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down because they were next. And last, the favorites, Joseph and Rachel, drew near and they bowed down. Who's missing? We still don't have Benjamin, right? So we still only have the 11 sons. Benjamin hasn't come yet. Verse 8, Esau said, What do you mean by all this company that I met? Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." So again, Esau had no intention on taking anything. He just wanted to be right with his brother. Verse 10, Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand." This always makes me think of my grandmother and my mom, because my grandmother would do something for her, and my mom would want to pay her for it. And so she'd give her a $20 bill or whatever. Well, my grandma would take that and say, no, you keep that, and she'd throw it back at her. And my mom would insist and say, "No, you take the $20 bill." And so my grandma would take the $20 bill and wait a little bit, and she'd shove it in my mom's coat pocket so that my mom would walk off with the $20 bill still. Because I don't want this. Meanwhile, there's others that would say, if anybody's handing out 20s, I'm game.
My mother's aunts, like one of them very close, they were like 6 age.
Yeah.
And we would always go to her house, and they would like stop, and then we'd say, "You're taking it." They would like, I'll have that.
Cindy said,
When the money in the kitchen, you're like, "We'll pay you."
Cindy said she was one of those kids that was offering to take the money when family members were fighting over who had it. Verse 11, "Please accept my gift that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. So ultimately, Jacob prevailed. Esau went ahead and took the gift. Notice again, we're seeing here that Jacob, carrying that mantle, that blessing, has a lot. He is very well off. Verse 12, I mean, you think of all the flock that he was offering to Esau, and it wasn't all of his flock. Verse 12, then Esau said, let us journey on our way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. So Jacob says to Esau, no, you go ahead of me and I'll meet you in Seir. You go ahead of me and I'll meet you there. Then Esau leaves and Jacob goes to a different place. So I don't know what the dynamic that was happening there. I don't know if maybe they still kept, he just let him know where he ended up. But he's still kind of being a little bit of his shy, sneaky self. But I was also thinking about, he said at the pace of the children in verse 14. This means that at least some of the children were walking this journey. I remember taking a year ago or so, my children, we went to Dayton and we were going to go see fireworks with my sister and her kids. I think it was a year ago, maybe two. And we had to walk about 20, 30 minutes to where the fireworks display was because of traffic and stuff. We wanted to just walk through the traffic. And I remember my kids, oh, my feet are, will someone carry me? This is so, I can't, and crying and tears, and I can't make it anymore. All for a 30-minute walk. And meanwhile, these kids are walking for days. I mean, it makes me think when I was a kid, I used to walk uphill in 20 feet of snow, and I was barefoot, and I just wore shorts and no shirt because we couldn't afford any clothes. And I just had to walk for 40 miles to school. I had to fight off bears and wolves all the way along, and uphill both ways. But nonetheless, it's intriguing me to think of this, these kids walking on this journey. Although, as we've seen, human nature has not changed much. So I wouldn't be surprised if these kids were kind of whining as they went on their way. Now, verse 18, and Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan ultimately becomes the land of Israel. On his way from Padan Aram, which again was where Laban was, that was north of Israel, just east of where Turkey is today. And he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Eloi Israel. Now, I want to note that it's interesting. I don't know if you caught this. Jacob, on his way out of the land, the Padan Aram, he has an encounter with God as he's fleeing Esau and heading to a place that he had not been before in Padan Aram. He has this vision or this encounter with God where he sees the ladder and the angels ascending and descending, and he has this moment with God. Then we don't see that happening, at least not in recorded Genesis history, until he's coming back now, leaving Padan Aram and coming back to the land. And it's actually in the same area where he had the ladder vision that he has that encounter where he wrestles with God. And I want you to think about that, because I think sometimes people think that if I'm close enough to God, I'm always on the mountaintop. and I'm always having a vision, or I'm always having these great experiences. And can we always have intimacy with God and delight in his presence? Yes. But God gives us these substantial moments when we're heading into something that's going to be difficult or challenging or confusing or that we're frightened about. Haven't you known it to be true for yourself? That when you're the scaredest, that's when God shows up. When you're the saddest, that's when God moves in. When you don't have anything, you don't have enough, that's when God shows up. Jacob, same thing. Both of these journeys, when he has his most significant encounters with God, it's because of the circumstances that he is facing. God knows when he needs us to give him an amazing, or give us an amazing touch. Now, chapter 34 is a disaster story. Are you ready for a disaster story? Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, and if you remember, the Hivites is where, is where Sarah is from. Sarah was a Hivite. If you remember that, we read that Ezekiel passage. Abram was what was Abraham? Anybody remember? I'd have to look up that passage. But whatever he was, Sarah was a Hivite, and here we're encountering the Hivites again. And the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her. He seized her and lay with her and humiliated her, and his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Now, I don't know about you, but it's probably not the best proposal method to rape the woman that you want to marry. So he forces himself upon this girl and says, "I'm in love with her and I want her to marry me." Some of it just speaks to really culture at the time. Men really...
I was actually going to even call you and tell you I'll come tomorrow because I have to come to this area.
Oh. There we go. That was Habiba unmuted there. No, I think she was on another line. Yeah. So I think it speaks to the culture of the time where they didn't respect women. They didn't care about women. They cared about them enough to get what they wanted from them. But other than that, they didn't really care about them. They were really objectified. And we think that that's the problem now, that men objectify women. They have since Genesis. Men have objectified women. Sex has always been an issue with men from the beginning. And here is showing the depravity of humanity. And remember, that's kind of the point of Genesis, is man, human beings are messed up. We're dysfunctional. We can't get it right. We don't treat each other right. We fracture relationships. There's bright spots here and there, but for the most part, we're a hot mess. We're a lost cause, and we're helpless. And is the point of it to make us feel rotten? No. The point of it is to let us know that this blessing that's supposed to be coming, that's the seed of the woman that's going to correct all these issues, we actually need that. We need that. We can't do anything without that. So we need this rescuer to come. And here we have depravity on display again. In verse 5, now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. So he didn't want to deal with it until his sons were back in from working the field. And I have to wonder if Dinah, because Dinah was Leah's daughter, I have to wonder if Dinah was Rachel's daughter, if there might not have been a possibly different reaction to what took place. Because Jacob, we're going to see, takes a very passive reaction to what happened to his daughter. But her brothers, it's a different story. Verse 6, and Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. Notice it was an outrageous thing that happened in Israel. They're now starting to recognize this promise that they're supposed to be having. This land is theirs, and so they're recognizing it as their land, and they're outraged about their sister here for obvious reasons. Could you imagine being Hamar? Now, I know in this context, culturally, it might not have been as tense of a moment, but could you imagine being Hamar? Okay, so my son just raped this girl. He wants to marry her, so I'm going to have to go and smooth this over and try to work this out so that I can get this marriage arranged. This is a messed up scene here. We'll pick up at verse 8 again. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the son of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us, give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife. So they want to intermarry with them. They want to start establishing a community, which we know is a problem because we need to protect this messianic line. And that's the reason why Abram kept sending off these children that were not a part of the line. It's the reason why Ishmael was sent off. That's the reason why Esau kind of gets out of the picture, because there is this line that needs to be protected here. And they can't intermarry, so that they can't do that. But there's going to be an exchange that's going to have some interesting meaning to this. Verse 13, the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. So they can't marry with someone who is uncircumcised. Now they're going to offer that these men get circumcised, and they have a scheme up their sleeve. But do you notice the disdain that I think is not only a disdain because you guys wronged my sister, but also a disdain because you guys are gross, uncircumcised people. And you kind of start to see, one, we saw the possessiveness of the land that they haven't quite established possession of yet. And you see this almost looking down upon because of a cultural, a foreskin issue, circumcision issue. And if you remember, the reason why they carried the blessing was not for them to be superior, but for them to be pure. This was their call, to be pure, but not superior. And we will see this throughout the Old Testament, that the Israelites constantly wrestle with this superiority thing. We see believers do that at times. You know, I'm superior to somebody else because I'm more spiritual or because I understand. And anything we see in Jacob, anything we have in Jacob's posture was this way. All these things I have, they were a blessing from God. That's why I have these things. It was because of God's grace. And yet these guys, anger comes, then arrogance comes, and then they create this scheme that takes place. Verse 15. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone. I find it interesting that it's saying we will take our daughter, because I think it's likely the brothers that have taken over this conversation here. So they have this sense of possessiveness over their sister. And they're scheming because they have no intention of actually holding up their end of the bargain. And we're going to see the disaster that ensues. And this is once again a demonstration of family sin, because Abraham lied about Sarah being his wife. He was deceptive. Isaac does the same thing. Rebekah lies and helps Jacob lie about the whole, it was Esau being blessed, but it was really Jacob. Jacob goes and has this back and forth deception relationship with Laban over the wages and the amount of time and who they marry and all that stuff. So there's this constant deception, and now his children are also being deceitful. Remember, when you sin, it affects more than just you. And it's not just the harm you've done to somebody. When you sin, you encourage the people around you to sin. And so it's so much more significant than just my actions. It's my impact on others. And you see how things just kind of spiral and keep getting. Verse 18, their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people, when every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. Did you notice something there? Will not their stuff be our stuff? And we see that Jacob's sons are also plotting dominance over these people. There is a power play that's happening, and both sides are trying to have power. This is humanity. Don't we always fight for control? And I got to get in control of this situation. I got to get leverage over this person. And humanity is doing this again here, where we're trying to make sure we're in the winning posture. That's the way human beings act. That's why when Jesus showed up, he said, whoever wants to be the greatest must be the servant of all. The first will be last, and the last will be first. If you want to be strong, you have to be weak, because man's posture is to strengthen up, to get in posture, to get leverage so that you have control of the situation. Verse 25, on the third day, excuse me, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers. Again, Simeon and Levi were born to Leah, as was Dinah. So they were actually full blood siblings here, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure, and killed all the males. So this was a bloodbath. They killed every single male in this tribe. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city. So they didn't just kill the guys, they also took everything, because they had defiled their sister. So they got their revenge. Verse 28, they took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones. So they're taking their kids and their wives, all that was in the houses they captured and plundered. This was at least the second time that the patriarch family had war. If you remember, Lot was kidnapped, and Abraham led his men that were trained for battle, and they went out and fought a war and rescued him. But I think that was a more just cause than this encounter, although they're defending their sister, who was obviously very poorly treated and wronged there. But they're killing people, slaughtering people just out of revenge, and they're taking stuff for their own possession. And again, the women are put out, which is why it was amazing when Jesus showed up on the scene and started talking to women and started touching women respectfully and started demonstrating love and elevating women, because in our culture that might not seem as big of a deal, but in Jesus's day, the way women were treated, they were nothing. And Jesus, they were like the dogs, and he says, eat from the crumbs. Now that was a little more because she was a foreigner also, but she was also a woman. Yeah. And so Jesus always had an eye for the people who were put out. And we actually see, this is reflective of Jesus being God, that throughout Genesis we have seen that anytime someone was hurting and was out, God showed up and blessed them. Hagar, when she was stranded, God showed up and did something for her. When Rachel couldn't have kids, when Leah couldn't have kids, God did something for them. God cares about those that are put out. And again, I'm thinking about the woman here, because not only have we had women that were taken as wife number 2, wife number 3, wife number 4, women who were just servants, then taken as a wife just to be a surrogate, and then kicked out on the road. Women who were raped because I just found her attractive. Then also here, these wives that are becoming wives to Jacob's sons. I'm getting married now to the guy who just slaughtered my husband. Do you get that? The Israelites just slaughtered all these men and now are taking their wives as theirs. Imagine being in that scenario where my present husband is the guy who killed my previous husband. Women were just constantly in awful, awful scenarios. Verse 30, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? Now I want you to note something. How do we know what was the right thing to be done here? Because Jacob is saying we should have been more diplomatic here. And his reasoning is more out of fear, because these guys are stronger than us. They can attack us. And he mentions the Canaanites and the Perizzites. So I know that all the people, the tribe of Shechem, the men were killed, but there were other tribes in this area that likely would have possibly retaliated. And Jacob is out of fear saying, we should have been more diplomatic. His sons are saying, no, this was an awful thing he did to her. They should have paid. So how do we know what was the right thing in God's mind? Anybody know? Well, when it comes to, what's that?
They didn't get it there.
So you think that means the brothers were right? Okay.
I think them the rapist.
The what? Yes, yeah.
He was like, oh, I love her and I want to marry her.
Yeah.
He's like, okay, but you have to start. Well, in my head, if I was a rapist, it would be like, you know?
Well, but that still doesn't answer the question for us, though, of how did God feel about this. When you're reading narrative, what you want to look for is what God says and how God responds to things. And actually, in this chapter, that's absent. We don't hear God saying anything about this. We don't see him reacting. Like if you think of Ananias and Sapphira, who just dropped down dead because of their lie, we don't see any kind of supernatural occurrence here. And so we have to kind of just stay in a question mark of, I don't know who did what was right, who did the right thing, or maybe neither of them did. Maybe Abraham should have been more stronger, but not as strong. as Levi and Simeon, which, if you remember, who comes from Levi? Anybody know who comes from Levi? The priest and the temple servants, and Moses and Aaron come from Levi, and Levi is a very aggressive, get revenge kind of person. So just interesting story, and it's right smack in the middle of this great reunion between Esau and Jacob, and we move from there into God bringing some blessings, and in the middle is this tragedy experience. So we're going to wait and see if he gives us, if God gives us some explanation as to why this experience with Dinah happened. So Father, thank you so much for your word, and thank you for the wisdom that's there and the mystery that's there, Lord. There are still things that are in Scripture that, like Cindy said, we might not even really need to have the answers, but they give us questions. And I just ask that you would continue to guide us and help us to grow in our understanding of what's taking place in the Word, so that we can know how to go out there and live the way that we should. Help us to not be deceitful. Help us to not be playing favorites. Help us to not sow seeds of contention in the relationships in our lives. Help us to be Christ-like in all that we do. In Jesus' name, amen.